Welcome back to the show. I have someone brand new to me in our community, Dr. Camilla Moore. Welcome to the show, Dr. Camilla.
Thanks, Megan. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, we were just chatting about where we live. You're in Rhode Island. I'm in
Yeah.
Florida. Very different climates. We were comparing food and what the food is like here. It sounds like you've got it made up there in Rhode Island.
Yeah, we have great food in Rhode Island. Very good food. Yeah, we're lucky.
Yeah, I was telling Dr. Camilla, I was like, my husband and I joke because look, I should be nicer about Florida. We really do love Florida, but there's good pockets of Florida with chef-owned restaurants. That's my favorite. But we joke when we first moved here, we were like, gosh, all the food and all the restaurants, all the food comes in on a Cisco truck, right? Like the Cisco truck delivers all the food and just so American. So you've got it made up there in Rhode Island.
Mhm.
Be glad.
Yeah, we are grateful. We've got culinary school up here. We've got farms. We've got the ocean, so fresh fish, and the chefs know what to do with it. So we are
Oh yeah.
very lucky. Yes.
Amazing. Amazing. Well, we are going to dive into some fascinating topics that I believe probably 100% of entrepreneurs, male or female, experience stress and burnout. We're going to dive into that. But before we do that, Dr. Camilla, you've got a really incredible background. You're new to our audience. So I'd love for you to share a little bit about yourself and what sparked your interest to go in the direction, like career direction that you decided to go in.
Well, thank you for that. I am a chiropractor by trade. I graduated many moons ago, and I had my first business was my private practice. That was a very successful practice. I sold that. That was a multi-six-figure business. I sold that in 2018. At the time, I was doing some research through Brown University at our local hospital system here. They wanted a chiropractor there, so I sold my practice and jumped into their lifestyle medicine department. We were at the time, my husband and I wanted a family, so we were going through all of that. And that proved to be a little bit more challenging than we had thought. So I was grateful to have a little bit more time than running the practice. And then COVID hit. So we had at that point, I was pregnant through COVID, I had my child through COVID, and then I worked. And, partway through that, I really hit the wall. And I knew I wanted to do something different. I ended up getting my board certification in lifestyle medicine, and of that, stress management is a big part of it. So that became my specialty. And over the next couple of years, I got my certification through the Benson Mind Body Institute at Harvard Medical School. So I teach a course that they certify. And about a year ago, there was some reshuffling in the hospital system, and I had the choice to jump ship, and that's what I did. And I've been doing this ever since, just
That's
100%
awesome.
coaching and teaching online. Yeah, it's been great. It's been great.
Yeah, I love that. I love a chiropractor, Dr. Camilla. I started going to chiropractors in my tiny little town. I was telling you before we press record, I'm from a
Yeah.
really, really small town in North Carolina, 2,000 people. I always joke, we had a stoplight, Hardee's, and a Piggly Wiggly. That was back in the 80s. I'm a 1982 baby. It's a
Mhm.
little bigger now. We have more than one stoplight and more than a Hardee's, and there's no Piggly Wiggly. But I was a tennis player growing up and I had back issues. I remember her name was Elizabeth. I don't remember her last name. And I think her practice is still there. I started going to
Possibly.
her when I was 15 and I am 42. And I was hooked on chiropractors from that moment. I've gone to one ever since. It's
That's
such
awesome.
amazing work.
Yeah, it's, and I love your backstory. I too am from a small rural town in Maine. And we had a few more people. We had about 3,500 people in our town. However, we had one stoplight, actually two stoplights, and in our entire county, which was the size of Connecticut, still is the size of Connecticut, it's still only two stoplights. So
Wow.
yes, I know, like I understand the rural part of your story. Both of my parents were in healthcare. They did community health, and that's where we kind of all got started on the healthcare kick. But I loved growing up there.
Yeah.
I love, you got to love being outside if you're going to be in the rural country, and it was just a great way to grow up.
Yeah. I agree. I think the small town living, simple living it's a really cool childhood.
Hmm. Hmm.
Okay. So chiropractic work, What
Yes.
sparked your interest in? I know you work with a lot of very, very ambitious women, and
Yes.
it is I am one of those people. Obviously, you are one of those people.
Yeah.
And if I think about my history going back to, I really remember this starting in high school for me, where I already had patterns of getting really burned out. I
Mhm.
was taking honors classes, I was in AP classes, all those things. And I remember it was one winter, I believe it was my sophomore year. So I would have been 15 years old, which is
Mhm.
interesting. I had the back injury at the
Mhm.
same time. I have this memory. I'm just putting those two things together right now. I remember being so stressed out about school and projects. I was an A student. And my mom, we lived in the center of the state in North Carolina. So about 2.5 hours east was the coast of North Carolina. And I had an aunt that lived there, my mom's sister. So my mom took me away to the beach for, I think it was about 4 days. And we rented a house right on the ocean. And she was like, that's what my mom would do too. So my
For
mom,
downtime.
her downtime, she was a career educator and a principal. And gosh, it's so interesting, like having this conversation. I remember she would like just tell us she was going to go to the beach. And so she would just like go to the beach for 2 days by herself, and she would just sit on the beach and read. So she did the same thing with me. And I remember she did that. She's done that with me at least 3 or 4 times as a teen and in college. And then if I just fast forward that, I have certainly had waves of burnout as an entrepreneur to the point where I decided to even shut down the programs I was running. This was a few years ago because I felt so burned out, so stressed out, so much anxiety around getting it right, making more money, making
Mhm.
sure my clients are getting results, making sure I'm serving everybody. And I don't think I'm the only one. I think a lot of us who want to do well, get it right, do right by our clients, it's almost like we operate that way. So I'm sure you probably see similar patterns with your
Yeah.
clients.
It's interesting because what you're describing, that the ebbs and flows, the highs and lows, like that's as a being, as a system, as a human being, we are always in flux like that. We are never stationary. And if you remember, you mentioned you used to be a high school teacher. So if you remember, like back to science class, this is probably middle school, where you learn this concept of homeostasis, where every being in the world is maneuvering around this ideal harmonious balance that they'll never really achieve, but they keep trying, they keep moving around that. And so with those ebbs and flows, like what you're describing, what we do with that's normal and that's natural, to have these stressors and to be able to come back around. And that's what you're describing that your mom did for you and that she taught you, and which is a really wonderful thing to say, all right, you've reached your limit. We need to recover and replenish a little bit. When you take that concept and you put it into business, yes, that motivating factor is definitely there. There's also stressors for just owning your own business, of wanting to be good, but also being able to be financially viable, to reach our goals, to set those expectations and to meet those expectations and then exceed them. And so with that motivation, sometimes it's easy to sacrifice what you need to replenish in order to continue to move forward. And so one of the things that we do is we talk about this concept of resilience, which I don't love that term, but the concept is really beautiful. And so what that is instead of having these huge highs and lows, what we're doing is we're just evening it out a little bit, so that as the stress comes in, you're able to recognize it and recover from it easier. You're able to respond to it better. And so, yes, you're still always going to have that because it's part of our nature as human beings, just as biological beings. You're always going to have those highs and lows, those ebbs and flows. But what we really want to be able to do is have those highs not be quite so high and have those lows be not quite so low, so that we're actually creating a balance around that that's a little bit more sustainable.
Okay, I am super curious how to do that, because one of the things that I see with entrepreneurs and entrepreneurs that I've worked with, I've experienced this myself in business as well, where it's like they'll go really hard for a certain amount of time and kind of, we'll just call it a hustle, do
Mhm.
the marketing thing, do the sales thing, make good money. And then all of a sudden, so consistent, consistent, consistent. All of a sudden, it's like something happens, or maybe they experience burnout, or they get tired, or there's a disruptor that comes in. Oftentimes, I see the disruptor being something that happened in the life category, not so much something that happened in the business category. Again, it's like a high, 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 and then a low. And then the pattern I see in business is they become very inconsistent for a period of time. That period of inconsistency passes, and then they realize, oh, wait, well, now I've got to restore my financial funds all over again. So I better rev the engine up.
Yes.
And then it's like this pattern that I just described. It's go hard again, but then either I tire out. The other thing that I hear from entrepreneurs too, and you could probably address this, is I'm getting really bored in my business, or I don't like what I'm doing, or I really just want to live, kind of like this easy life, and my business is taking over my life. I know you see this too with your clients. So how do we kind of navigate these highs and these lows so that we're not having such extremes, and then this start-stop motion in our businesses that's actually causing us to honestly plateau as a business owner?
So it's a good question. And so what what you're describing is exactly what happens over and over and over again. And so when we talk about resilience, what we're really talking about is the ability to adapt to change better. And so what this is, I'm going to just take a step back, and I'm going to define 3 terms so that we can apply them to this conversation a little bit better and hopefully clear up some confusion that might be out there. And those 3 terms I want to define are stress, chronic stress, and burnout, because we tend to use those interchangeably or tend to think of them as very similar things. In reality, they're not. So when we talk about stress, like an acute stress, that is a normal physiological response. That is just our body responding to something that we perceive to be stressful or is stressful. So great example of that, we have 195 and 95 here in Rhode Island. You're driving down the interstate and you get cut off, and your response is you white knuckle it, your breathing increases, you might sweat a little bit, and you tense up. Well, as soon as that guy passes and you realize the threat is over, then your body is going to go back to baseline, right? These are the ebbs and flows, normal ebb and flow. And so that is our normal stress response and our normal stress recovery. If you take that situation and now you're driving to work, you get cut off, your muscles tense up, your breathing increases, your heart rate goes up, and you white knuckle it, but then you get to the office before you can actually decompress, and you get to the office and all of a sudden there's staff out, there's this crisis, there's a dumpster fire, and you don't have time to recover from that initial stress before the next round comes in. And so what that does is that leads to chronic stress over hours, over months, over hours, over days, over weeks, over months, over years, when you don't have the ability to recover from each of these smaller individual stresses. It begins to compile up, and we see that in disease. It starts to have an effect on our well-being. And we know this. Chronic stress is a huge mediator of cardiovascular disease, insomnia and sleep disorders, digestive disorders, mental health disorders. So we can see over time how our bodies just become used to this high level of stress, but it's not healthy. And we can see that in our disease. Burnout is a very different beast. Burnout is an environmental issue. Burnout has to do less with the stress and more with, do I feel valued with what I'm doing? Does it matter that what I am giving is being seen, heard, appreciated, and acknowledged? And so it has more to do with what we give of ourself than the job we are doing. And so we see this in the language. We see this with people that are burnt out. They will say, like, I just don't care anymore. Or to your point, I'm just bored with it. It's not doing anything for me. Or they become very cynical, where like it just becomes a very negative experience. Fatigue and exhaustion is one symptom that we see. So those are three distinct categories. And that being said, we see a lot of overlap with them. So stress goes hand in hand with burnout, because oftentimes you are in a very stressful environment that is causing you to become depleted in your energy sources. And so when we put all that stuff together and we recognize that it's not about work-life balance, like I think we all kind of intuitively know that that's a little bit of BS. And so it's not about that. You are you. You are living your life. You're the business owner, you're the wife, you're the mother, you're the father, you're the dad. Like, you are that person no matter what hat you're wearing. And so in order to build that resilience, you have to look at your life in its totality. And the way that we start making changes in behavior is by changing mindset. And the way that we change mindset is by changing perspective. So one of the things that we teach is, instead of looking at your tasks and having responsibilities and prioritizing, instead of looking at your life and making a to-do list of, what is most important, start looking at it through a lens of energy. And you start putting things, and this is one of the things that we do. You just take a piece of paper and you put a column down the middle, and you put charges and pluses on one end and drains and negatives on the other. And then you sit and you start really categorizing the events in your life, the people in your life, the responsibilities in your life, not by what is most important, but by what it is taking from you and what you are giving to it and what you get back. And so when you do this and you start seeing things through a different perspective, then you can start making different decisions about how you want to go forward. And so it's one of the things that connects both that work and that life, because you are the consistent piece. So that's where, like, if one of the things that going back to what you had asked about is like this huge motivating factor, something derails you, and then you have to make up for that. When we talk about resilience, what we're talking about is having a foundation so that when things get derailed, one, you have the energy to move through it and not have to stop, but also to be able to handle it better when it gets there. So when we're talking about resilience, that's what I mean, the ability to adapt to change. And so if you are giving 150% to something and you're not getting that 150% back, then at some point you will get burnt out.
Okay, so I'm just writing down a note because there's a certain question I want to ask you.
Yeah.
So before I ask you that question, your explanation of stress, chronic stress, and burnout was super helpful for me. And I'm going to share this little personal. I'll share the short version of this because I think what I experienced is a lot of people have experienced this, and we just don't talk about it out loud very much. So, we're all looking at each other on social media all the time, and we assume everybody is perfect and they have nothing going on behind the scenes. So a few minutes ago, I shared a few years ago, I actually closed down. I stopped launching and selling my group coaching programs and my masterminds a few years ago. And I switched to a full-blown consulting model for a couple of years. And now I'm back building the coaching side of the business. But it was December of 2021. I never tested positive for COVID, but I'm pretty sure that's what I had. I was down and out for about a month. And I started seeing a naturopath, 2 different ones after that. Mm-hmm. It was in February because I couldn't get better. I would feel like I was like 60 to 70% better, and I just could not get past that. And so one of the naturopaths I went to, this is in North Carolina, my husband had cancer 20 years ago. And he went to this same woman who used to be an oncology nurse at Duke University. She's in her 70s now. And we both went to see her. And she goes, "Your adrenals are completely shot." I was like, "Well, what causes that?" And she said, "Well, do you have thoughts that are just like constantly racing and you're thinking like so far into the future, but a lot of it is like worrying thoughts?" I was like, "Yeah, my whole life." And that's nothing new. But I love how you shared about burnout being an environmental issue and what we're giving of ourselves, because the tape that was playing in my mind in 2019 and 2020, before I kind of went down in 2021, was I'm working with all these people and I feel like I can't even use my ultimate gifts. Like I feel like I'm like not even scratching the surface of why I'm here and what I can really do with people. And it's like they can't even really access the value that I could add to them. And I felt like that about like 50% of my clients. And that went on for a few years. And so my mind was constantly spinning because then I was like, oh my gosh, now I'm responsible for still helping all these people get these results. And now I have to like almost work overtime to help that. But it wasn't overtime in hours, it was internally. I was having to work so hard internally and such overtime emotionally on the inside. And I just felt like I think the best way for me to describe it is I felt satisfied to a degree, but it wasn't internally fulfilling because it's like I couldn't use my greatest gifts because of who I was attracting in. Like it was like 50-50, which was also strange. So I certainly, that really clears a lot up for me personally, that it was probably burnout, what I was experiencing. I had thyroid issues, shot adrenals, and like hormonal imbalances. And I think it was burnout. Nobody ever used that word with me, but I think that's what it was.
Well, your adrenal glands are tied to your stress response too. And I think there's, naturopaths use different language. But part of, one of the things that I love and appreciate about the alternative medical field is, of which I am a part, is that there's a difference between fixing and supporting, and that's where like we've lost sight sometimes of the actual healing process. And that's what she was helping you do, was to actually help facilitate the healing process that you're able to do in your own body instead of trying to just fix it from the outside in. But
Yeah.
what you were talking about, the word that kept coming to my mind as you were talking is you just weren't able to be authentic. You weren't able to
Yeah.
be like 100% your authentic self. And this is where, earlier you and I were talking about like how this stress management and burnout is really tied to business success and sustainability. And this is a great example of how that happens, because the better you understand yourself, who you are as a person, what you want to give to this world, and what you want to be able to, what your values are at the core of it, then you apply the business to that. But if you don't have that foundation of understanding who you are, who your authentic self is, and what you want to give, then you are going to end up feeling potentially how you did, which was, yes, it's checking some boxes. You're making money, you're able to put food on the table, you're able to, whatever personal or professional goals you had, you're checking them. But it's the difference between achieving and succeeding. And so that's one of the big differences that we talk about, and in our society, we often equate the two, that if you're achieving, you are therefore succeeding. But I would argue that those are two very different things. And my life changed when I recognized the difference. Achieving is what you're talking about, these milestones that we set, in business, these goals, these things that we want to accomplish, in our lives, in our personal lives, in our professional lives. But when we talk about success, that is really like at the end of the day, at the end of our road, are we able to say this was a successful life that I lived? And so that usually is a much deeper conversation. And that is where we connect with each other. And we have to understand that this connection that we have, we are community creatures. Your 2,000 person town, like that was a community. And the only way that we have been able to survive the past 20,000 years as a species is through cooperation. If we got 20,000 years ago, if we got separated from our community, from our pack, from our tribe, our chances of survival diminished exponentially. We needed each other to survive, and we carry that with us now. And so if you are losing sight of that, of what you are giving to your community, whether that's a community of clients, whether that's a community at large, whether that's your family community, if you are losing sight of that, that's one of the first red flags that comes with burnout.
That's really good. Wow. That's awesome. Okay, so before I forget, because we were
Yes.
talking earlier,
Yeah.
we get to a certain age and we have a thought in our mind. That's why I had to write down a word so
I
it would
know.
activate, like, ask her this question. Okay, so you were a few minutes ago, you were talking about resiliency. And you use that word a lot. And I know you don't love the word, but people understand what it means. Like, we understand what that means. So I heard, it's not the first time I've heard this, but someone the other day, I don't remember who I was listening to. It was in the business category. And they were talking about, if you look at folks who, whether it's business or it's any endeavor that they are pursuing, and they are, getting to the top of whatever that field or industry is, doesn't matter. But they said the further people get, it's this indication that you are able to withstand pressure better than other people. And to me, when I was listening to you talk about resilience, I was like, you know what? I think that's kind of what they mean. The more resilient you are, does that mean you can go further? You can build something bigger? I mean, we are talking to entrepreneurs here. And I think in the entrepreneur's mind, it's constantly like, I want to create more. I want to serve more people. I want to have more impact. I want to speak on more stages. I want to make more money. Whatever the more is, I think we're constantly asking for and seeking for the more and the bigger or whatever. And, I have worked with people who are making $0 and they're just starting their journey. I've also consulted education companies as large as 45 million. And the biggest difference that I see, I mean, they actually have a lot of the same problems, believe it or not. Like, the problems really don't change from a business perspective. They're just bigger problems. There's more money at stake and there's more people involved the larger the company is. But one of the biggest differences I see at those bigger levels, when people are making 7, 8, multiple 8 figures, the pressure is so intense because there is more money at stake. Their family is at stake. More clients are at stake. Their payroll, team, families' lives are at stake. So I really do see people at that level. It's like their stress is at an all-time high because there is so much pressure, but yet they also seem to find a way to continue going or starting other businesses. What do you have to say about that statement that I heard? If you can handle the pressure, you can keep going, build bigger. Is there a connection between being able to handle the pressure and what you're talking about around stress management and resiliency?
So it's an interesting question. The reason why I don't love the term resilience is because it invokes this sense of strength that is a little misleading. And so what it means is, like, if you are unable to handle that pressure, then you are somehow less resilient. And what that does is it breeds a culture where you end up exactly like what we were talking about before, where you're going a million miles an hour blindly and doing, and everything you're doing is to support that one thing. And so being one dimensional like that is the greatest risk, because if that column is just gone out from under you, like, you'll crash. Like, if that one thing is gone, then that's all you have, then nothing is left. The better word, I think, other than resilience, is adaptability. And so that also applies with these very successful folks that you're talking about, where they're able to work at a high level, where there's a lot of responsibility. But because there's a lot of responsibility does not necessarily mean there is a lot of stress. And so if you have a way of managing that stress and being more resilient to that stress, meaning you're able to, again, those highs aren't quite so high and the lows aren't quite so low, you're able to keep that even keel throughout the day, weeks, months, and years, then that is a much more sustainable position than having to go all out and all in. over and over again, because that's the exhausting part. And we see this with stress. There's a term called allostasis, and that is our body's ability to return to normal. And when we get into a chronic stress situation where you're feeling that overstressed, it's not so much the stress itself or even the stress response with our cortisol and our adrenaline. It is your your body trying to come back to baseline and handle that stress that becomes the tax on your system. So it's not even just so much the stress itself, it's trying to manage that stress that becomes exhausting.
Okay, that was really helpful.
Good.
It was very helpful to hear. And again, I know our audience is really resonating with this. And I have one more example I want to run by you of something that I see and hear consistently in the entrepreneurial space. But the part that resonated with me the most is when you were saying it's not, I think this is what you said. So correct me if I'm wrong. The bigger you get, let's just say in business, it's not actually more stressful. Is that what you just said?
It doesn't have to be.
You don't
have to equate responsibility with stress.
With stress. That's it. Yeah. And
okay. Those aren't necessarily the same thing. The other thing that happens with these folks that you're talking about that are, at a very high level is they also, by that point, their resilience also comes in the form of experience and wisdom and knowledge. They know, and that's why, you usually see older folks in those roles because, the CV, the pedigree matters because you want to know that they have learned how to handle different situations because it's the experience that matters. And that person that has that experience also has the confidence. That confidence will decrease that stress.
Okay. So here's the other reason why I like this. I started hearing this a lot in the COVID years. So 2020, I really started hearing this in 2021. And it was largely from women. And I work with coaches and consultants, largely from women who had managed to figure out how to make 6 figures a year, like low 6 figures. We'll say between like 100 to 500K a year. That was the crowd that I heard these statements from the most, where it was like, I don't want to have a big team. I don't want to manage something that big. I don't want to have all those clients. It was a lot of like, I don't want to have this bigness because I don't want the stress of that. So I'm really glad. And then what I see then is typically, not all the time, but very often I was seeing this, people were burning down their businesses. They were completely changing their business model. They were almost going in a completely different direction. And again, it was sort of like this start over from scratch. Let's start all the way over. Let's go build something all over again. Because again, to your point, I think there is a very big misconception and we are equating more responsibility with more stress. And I don't want more stress in my life. I want to have I want to do what I want to do when I want to do it. And I want to have this nice, flowy, fluffy life. So I'm loving what I'm hearing because you have helped me a lot just by saying that, because I think we are afraid of that. I think we're afraid of leading something, leading more people, having more at stake. And we think more responsibility is it's going to take over my life. It's going to take over my being, and I'm going to be stressed out all the time. But you're saying we don't have to be that way.
No, and what you're really talking about there is culture. You're talking about the culture of your work. That's where that becomes very important because you can be, and I think everybody can understand this, you do not need to be in a position of leadership to feel the toxicity of a bad working environment and to have that affect you. So that's what I mean when I say like responsibilities is not always equates with stress. It does sometimes, but not always. But if you can create a culture that is healthy, that is where you're not feeling this like draining energy on you every day. And if you are a leader and able to do that, we know this. Like the research is very clear that if you have a culture where you invite people to feel mattered, if you have them so that they feel appreciated, they feel seen, they feel like they are a part of something, That is a healthy culture. The first sign that there is an unhealthy culture in your work environment is gossiping. Yes, this is actually studied. If you find people are gossiping about other people within your workplace, that is the first sign that things are going downhill. And so, because what that means is that you haven't created this culture of respect where people are different, and because they're different, they matter in different ways. And so that is the step one down into that bad culture. But what you're saying there is really like, yes, you can absolutely lead in an environment at work and also be able to have a family at home. You can do those two things, but you cannot do those two things in unhealthy environments. And that goes back to what we were talking about before, looking at your life in its totality. Because in order to have a high pressure job and be able to enjoy that, you also need to have support at home, because you need to be able to decompress, and you have to have an environment at home that supports that. So they go hand in hand. And that's why separating that work and life, I understand conceptually, but in practice, you are consistent across both of those fields.
Yeah. And are we the creator of our environment? I think a lot of people think they're not in control. So
Well,
whip us into shape, Dr. Camilla.
yeah, I mean, to an extent, and this is where, managers and leaders are just super important in the workplace, in a corporate environment, because they set the tone. And you can have these little pockets of healthy departments that have a separate culture from a whole big organization, or you can have a culture of toxicity that just permeates through the entire thing. It depends on that environment and who is establishing that environment. And so, yes, you can have that, both for sure.
Got it. Okay. Amazing. I love this. I could
But you
listen to
have
you
to
all day
work
long.
but you have to work
Yeah.
at it.
Oh, yeah. It's not just going to snap your fingers and there it is. Okay, great. I love it. Okay, let's land the plane. Can you leave us with maybe two or three small little quick wins we can go create and start moving in this direction?
Which direction? To just like
Stress
being a little bit more
management,
healthy?
resiliency.
Sure.
Yeah.
So the first thing that I would recommend is doing that little exercise that we were talking about, because that energy exercise is actually very eye-opening. To be able to sit and just look, yes. And I
wrote it down. For those who can't see this, I wrote down the exercise and I drew it out on my page because I'm going to do this.
That is actually from our SMART program. That is from our Harvard SMART program. It's called the energy battery. It's one of the many things that we do in that class, but it is one of the first things, because it also begins, again, looking at things through a different perspective. And I want to just give a little bit of information about that. This is not, when you do that exercise, it is not about measuring your love or your commitment or your responsibility. It is just about draining. And so I'll give you an example. I have a 4.5-year-old, love him to death, would die for this kid, light of my life. I love the fours. I decided 4 years old is just the best. So he goes on the plus side. But some days we have 4-year-old days, and those are very draining. So he goes on both sides, because sometimes I need a little extra. I need those 4-year-old days where everything is a little bit more draining, a little bit harder. I might need a little bit more time to recover. And I need to know what that means for me, because what that means for me is different than what it means for you. And so being able to look at that objectively. The other thing that is this 40 to 50-year-old generation is we are the sandwich generation. So oftentimes we are taking care of not only our children, but we are beginning to be caregivers for our parents. And so that is another category that can create a lot of drains and stress. And so you have to be able to look at this from an objective place. So that's one thing. The other thing is we talk about resilience, and that is really with stress. And when we're talking about that, about building resilience, the evidence is very clear, and we want a few things. This is where what we're doing matters. We need to be eating the right foods, a lot of plant-based, whole grain foods that gives, lots of good healthy fats, lots of good healthy protein that is building that gut-brain axis, because there is a very strong scientific connection there where what we eat affects our entire body. So we need to be having good nutrition. We need to be having at least 150 minutes of exercise a week. And for women, that should also include strength training and flexibility training. But we need to have that outlet to get our heart going, to really just, I always look at exercise like this one big purge. Like, it gets the stress out, it gets your energy out, it just gets everything moving. Your metabolism gets kicked in, like everything just gets revved up. We need to sleep better. That is one of the things. Yes. And so if you do all of these, you will be able to sleep better. But we need to sleep. That is our recovery time. It's when our body just recovers and replenishes from everything. We need to have our connections with each other, and we need to have some level of spirituality, like mindfulness, meditation, something that connects you and grounds you and gets that relaxation response kicking in very regularly. So when we're talking about resilience, we're really talking about those things that we can control. But I want to be clear is that you can be very healthy in that way. And if you are put in an unhealthy environment, you can still get burnt out. You can still get drained. You can be doing all the right things, but if you are going into a bad relationship or a bad working environment that is draining that part of you, then you will still get burnt out no matter how healthy you are. That's where the distinction is very important.
Yeah, I could see that for sure. Well, I'm certainly going to do the energy exercise and make sure I'm doing all these other things consistently. You mentioned the SMART program, and I know that you lead that up at Harvard Medical School, correct?
No, nope, I am a clinical certified teacher for that. So I teach
Okay.
that online. Yep. So that's a
Amazing.
program. Yes, you have to go through a whole thing, but I teach that course online.
Okay, got it. So tell us how we can anybody take that course? Where can people find you, learn from you, take courses from you?
Yep. So I'm just about to launch a smaller version. It's a 10-day. That's a big program. The SMART program is a big one. One-on-one coaching with that, and also group coaching. But I have a 10-day program that's going to be at a much lower price point that I'm going to be launching next week, hopefully. But you can find me on Instagram. You can find me on LinkedIn. Dr. Camilla Moore is my handle on Instagram. I'm on there every day. I respond to DMs and respond to comments. So I'm actually there, or you can find me on LinkedIn.
Perfect. I love it. And all that information and the exercises that Dr. Camilla mentioned are in these show notes. So make sure you go review those and go connect with her and check out her course. All right, Dr. Camilla, this was an awesome conversation, super helpful, and one that I think every single human being, entrepreneur or not, certainly is going to gain a lot of wisdom from.
I hope so. Thank you so much for having me. This was great.
Yeah, you're welcome. And until next time, remember to design a business and life that is built to last. Very fitting for our conversation today.
Yes.